Many Christians believe they are ready for the rapture, yet Scripture suggests that most will be caught unprepared, not because they lacked faith, but because they misunderstood the one thing that truly matters. In the next few minutes, I want to show you the single requirement Jesus emphasized, the one that quietly separates the ready from the unready, and how understanding it can bring clarity, peace, and confidence instead of fear. This is not about prophecy charts or religious effort. It is about the condition of your heart, something you can examine today. If you have ever wondered whether your faith is truly alive or merely familiar, this message may change how you see readiness forever. Sometimes I sit quietly and think about how often we talk about the rapture, and yet how rarely we truly stop to ask ourselves a harder question. Not when it will happen, not how it will happen, but whether we are actually ready. Have you ever noticed that? We live in a time where information is everywhere. Sermons, podcasts, Bible studies, prophecy charts, endless debates about timelines and signs. Many believers know a great deal. They have heard it all. They have read it all. And yet, deep down, many feel a quiet unease they cannot quite explain. A sense that something is missing. I have spent many years speaking with believers across the United States. Faithful people, church-going people, people who love God sincerely. And one sentence comes up more often than you might expect. I believe in Jesus, but I'm not sure I'm really ready. Maybe you have felt that way too. Not fear exactly, not doubt in God. Just a subtle awareness that knowing about Christ is not the same as walking closely with Him. That activity is not the same as intimacy. That being busy for God does not always mean being with God. Jesus never complicated the matter of readiness. In fact, He did the opposite. While people love complex systems and checklists, Jesus reduced everything to something profoundly simple and deeply uncomfortable. The condition of the heart. Not attendance, not knowledge, not outward religion. The heart. I want you to imagine something for a moment. Picture a long marriage, 50 years, maybe more. The couple knows each other's routines, habits, favorite meals, and stories. They share history. But somewhere along the way, the conversations became shallow. The listening faded. The closeness slowly slipped away. On paper, everything looks fine, but intimacy has quietly left the room. Spiritually speaking, many believers live exactly this way. They believe. They serve. They remain connected to religious structure. But the living relationship, the daily awareness of Christ's presence, the quiet surrender of the heart, that has grown distant. Jesus warned us about this without using complicated language. He spoke of virgins waiting for the bridegroom. All of them believed He was coming. All of them were waiting. All of them looked prepared on the outside. But when the moment came, only those with oil were ready. Oil in Scripture is never about performance. It is internal. It cannot be borrowed. It cannot be transferred. It cannot be faked at the last minute. That oil represents intimacy, a living connection, a heart that has been cultivated quietly over time. You see, readiness is not something you rush into when the signs become obvious. Readiness is something you live into long before anything happens. It is a posture, not a reaction. One of my colleagues, a counselor who has worked with believers for decades, once told me something that stayed with me. Most people don't drift away from faith. They drift away from intimacy. They still believe the right things. They still say the right words. But the closeness fades, almost unnoticed. Jesus did not say the rapture would come to the most informed believers. He said it would come suddenly, in a moment, without warning. And sudden moments reveal what has been cultivated quietly. This is not meant to create anxiety, quite the opposite. When intimacy is real, fear loses its grip. When the relationship is alive, readiness becomes natural. Think about someone you deeply love. You do not need a checklist to respond to their voice. You recognize it instinctively. You know when they are calling you. That is the kind of readiness Jesus spoke about. Not a state of constant alarm, not spiritual exhaustion, but a heart that is awake. In today's world, distraction is relentless. News cycles, technology, entertainment, endless noise. Even good things can crowd out the quiet space where intimacy with God grows. Many believers are not rebellious, they are simply distracted. And distraction, over time, produces spiritual sleep. Jesus said, "Watch," not because he wanted us afraid, but because he wanted us present, awake, attentive. There is a reason he compared his return to a bridegroom coming for his bride. A bride is not preparing out of obligation. She is preparing out of love, out of longing, out of relationship. The rapture is not about escaping the world. It is about responding to a person. And that response begins in the heart, long before the trumpet sounds. I want to ask you something, gently and honestly. When you pray, do you feel connection or routine? When you think about Jesus returning, do you feel hope or uncertainty? When life gets busy, is intimacy with him the first thing that slips away? There is no condemnation in these questions, only invitation. Because the single requirement is not perfection. It is not flawless behavior. It is not constant spiritual intensity. It is a heart that remains turned toward him. That heart produces faith that works, obedience that flows naturally, holiness that grows quietly, discernment that protects, hope that steadies the soul. And when the moment comes, whether in a calm afternoon or an ordinary night, that heart will recognize his voice, not with surprise, but with joy. In the rest of this message, we will talk about how that intimacy is cultivated, how faith stays alive beyond religion, and how a quiet, surrendered heart becomes the safest place to stand in uncertain times. But for now, I want you to sit with this thought. Readiness is not about what you are doing for Jesus. It is about who you are becoming with him. And that changes everything. When we talk about readiness, most people instinctively think about effort, doing more, learning more, trying harder. That is how we have been trained all our lives. If something matters, we work for it. If something is important, we prepare through action. And in many areas of life, that makes perfect sense. But the spiritual life does not always follow the same rules. Jesus never framed readiness as a checklist. He never said, "Do these 5 things and you will be ready." Instead, he kept pointing people back to something quieter, something less visible, something most of us are not used to measuring: relationship. I have seen this play out again and again in real life. People who have served in churches for decades, people who know Scripture well, people others look up to. And yet, when life slows down, when illness comes, when loss arrives, they sometimes admit something surprising. I feel distant from God. Not angry, not unbelieving, just distant. That distance does not usually come from rebellion. It comes from neglect, from drifting, from letting the urgent replace the important. Faith, as Jesus described it, is not static. It is not something you receive once and place on a shelf. It is alive or it is fading. There is no neutral state. The kind of faith that prepares a person for the return of Christ is not intellectual faith alone. It is not simply agreeing with doctrine or believing certain truths are correct. It is living faith. Faith that listens. Faith that responds. Faith that changes how you live quietly, day by day. You can know every prophecy and still be spiritually asleep. Knowledge informs the mind, but intimacy shapes the heart. And only the heart recognizes the voice of the bridegroom. I want you to think about how relationships work in ordinary life. A close friendship does not survive on shared history alone. It survives on ongoing attention, on listening, on presence. If you stop showing up, even without conflict, closeness fades. The same is true with God. Prayer becomes routine instead of connection. Scripture becomes information instead of conversation. Worship becomes habit instead of encounter. And over time, without anyone noticing, the oil begins to run low. Jesus warned about this without accusation. He spoke plainly. Some would be ready, some would not, and the difference would not be visible until the moment arrived. That is a sobering thought, but it is also clarifying. Readiness is not about being dramatic or extreme. It is about being awake. Being awake does not mean being anxious. It means being attentive, spiritually present, aware of what is happening inside you, not just around you. One of the most common things I hear from older believers is this: life moved faster than I expected. Careers, family responsibilities, financial pressures, health concerns. Years pass quickly, and spiritual life can quietly become something we intend to return to when things slow down. But Scripture never speaks of a season where readiness can be postponed. Jesus said he would come at an hour no one expects. Not during crisis, necessarily. Often during normal life. That is why intimacy matters so much. It keeps the heart sensitive. It keeps faith responsive. Intimacy is not built through intensity. It is built through consistency. Quiet moments, honest prayer, willingness to listen, not just speak. And when intimacy is real, obedience stops feeling like obligation. This is something many people misunderstand. Obedience is not the root of readiness, it is the fruit. When a heart loves deeply, it responds naturally. You do not obey to earn closeness. You obey because closeness already exists. The same is true with holiness. Holiness is not about moral perfection. It is about alignment, about choosing what keeps the relationship clear and letting go of what dulls it. In a world growing more confusing, more noisy, more spiritually deceptive, that alignment becomes protection. I have watched people who are deeply intimate with God walk through seasons of chaos with remarkable steadiness. Not because they understood everything, but because they trusted someone. Their faith did not remove difficulty, but it anchored them. That is the kind of faith Scripture points to again and again. Abraham stepping forward without full understanding, Noah building when it made no sense, Mary saying yes without knowing the outcome. None of them were perfect. All of them were responsive. Readiness is not about never stumbling. It is about staying turned toward God when you do. Another important truth we do not talk about enough is distraction. Distraction is the great enemy of spiritual wakefulness. Not sin in the obvious sense, not rebellion, but constant noise, constant input, constant busyness. The last days, according to Jesus, would not feel dramatic at first. They would feel normal, ordinary. People eating, drinking, marrying, working. That normalcy is what makes readiness so important. If your faith only activates in crisis, you will be unprepared when Christ comes quietly. But if your faith is woven into daily life, into ordinary moments, into small choices, readiness becomes part of who you are. Community also plays a role here. While intimacy with God is deeply personal, isolation weakens discernment. We were never meant to walk this path alone. Honest fellowship keeps us awake. It reminds us of truth when our focus drifts. It strengthens hope when weariness sets in. And hope matters. The heart that is truly ready is not fearful. It is expectant. Fear produces tension. Hope produces steadiness. When you know someone is coming whom you love, you do not dread the moment. You look forward to it. That is the posture Jesus is calling his people toward. Not panic, not obsession, but quiet anticipation. So let me ask you again, gently. What occupies the center of your heart these days? What shapes your attention when life grows quiet? If Christ were to call today, would his voice feel familiar? These are not questions to answer publicly. They are questions to sit with, honestly. Because readiness is not built in public moments, it is built in private ones. In the final part of this message, we will talk about how to remain awake in a distracted world, how hope reshapes daily life, and how a surrendered heart stays ready without strain or fear. But for now, remember this. The single requirement is not heavy. It is not complicated. It is a living relationship. And that relationship, once restored and nurtured, carries you all the way home. As we come to the end of this conversation, I want to leave you with something simple. Not a warning, not a demand, but an invitation. After all the discussions, the teachings, the questions about the rapture, what remains is not fear, but clarity. Jesus did not complicate readiness. He did not hide it behind mystery. He placed it where every person could reach it, in the heart. That is both humbling and comforting. It means God is not measuring you by your performance. He is not counting your accomplishments or comparing you to others. He is looking at something far quieter, far more honest. Your attentiveness, your love, your willingness to stay close. Readiness is not a finish line you cross one day and forget about. It is a posture you live from, a way of being present with God in the ordinary rhythms of life, in the quiet mornings, in unanswered prayers, in moments of weariness and joy alike. A prepared heart is not a perfect heart. It is a responsive one that listens, one that turns back quickly, one that remains open even when it does not understand. And here is the beauty of the single requirement. It does not demand extraordinary strength. It does not require flawless faith. It does not belong only to those with years of study or impressive spiritual resumes. It belongs to anyone willing to remain turned toward Jesus. In a world growing louder and more uncertain, that posture becomes an anchor. It keeps you steady when others panic. It keeps you awake when many drift. It keeps hope alive when fear feels easier. When the moment comes, whether in the stillness of an ordinary day or in a time no one expects, the heart that has learned to stay close will not be startled. It will recognize the voice, not because it knows every detail of prophecy, but because it knows the one who is calling. So I want to encourage you, gently. Make space for intimacy again. Protect the quiet places of your faith. Choose presence over performance. Not out of pressure, not out of fear, but out of love. Because readiness is not about escaping this world. It is about belonging to someone beyond it. And when the trumpet sounds, the prepared heart will rise, not with confusion, but with confidence. Not with anxiety, but with joy. That is not just preparation, that is hope. And that hope, quietly cultivated, will carry you all the way home.